I am Michael Cobb, President of the Arkansas Jazz Heritage Foundation, and it is our great privilege and honor to be here visiting with David Miller and to present him with this plaque noting his induction into the Arkansas Jazz Hall of Fame on behalf of the Arkansas Jazz Heritage Foundation. David, thank you for all you have done for jazz, for the education, for the information, for the fun. It's been wonderful, and this formally acknowledges that, and I'm happy to present it to you.
Well, thank you very much, and I tell you, I feel honored to be part of the organization and to get this award. Jazz has been an important part of my life, my whole life, and since coming to Arkansas 40 years ago, I have been amazed and pleased at the opportunities that are offered to someone who is a jazz fan, and I've tried to include that in the broadcasts that I've done over the years, swinging down the lane. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting us into your home and into your studio, into the inner sanctum of where it all happens. So if you don't mind, let's have a seat.
Why, sure.
I will ask you a few questions and we'll just chat. And
I'd like to put
I don't have a script, so we'll just see where this goes. We'll just improvise.
All right.
Kind of like jazz.
Yes, exactly right.
Yes. Where did I hear it somewhere? There are no mistakes in jazz, only opportunities. So,
I like that.
The same goes here. I read your bio. Of course, I knew things about you anyway, but it really helped to read that, and it's just amazing the career path that you have taken. Have a hunch it didn't go in a direction you were aware that it was going to go. I don't know, but so many places we could start. But if you don't mind, I'm always curious how people get to Little Rock, because I got to Little Rock in 1975. You got to Little Rock shortly after I did. Could you tell us a little bit about how did you get to Little Rock? What were your thoughts, your feelings, concerns?
Well,
whatever.
Concerns is an interesting note, because when I was in school in New Jersey, one of the tasks for the young kids was to know the 48 states. Yes, 48 states. Yeah. And I would be able to rattle off 47 of them with no problem at all. And then I'd have to look up, oh yes, Arkansas.
Arkansas.
But years later, I arrived here, and I'll give the short version because I have lived in 9 different states. New Jersey being the first one. I did my graduate work in Michigan. I joined an advertising agency, and after spending time in the Army in Pennsylvania, I went with the advertising agency in New York. Mm-hmm. And then comes music big into the scene. I was in my late 20s when I joined RCA Corporation. And of course, RCA was one of the big sellers of records. They used to have the old Victor records back in the 1930s. Yeah. His Master's Voice. Yeah. And one of the nice things about being on the managerial role at RCA was that every month we had our choice of 15 LPs or cassettes. We just simply checked them off on a list. And this was at the time when it was a major assignment at RCA to take the old 78 RPM records and convert them onto LPs. So I built over several years a very nice collection of things. And remember, RCA, well, that was Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, Duke Ellington, and on and on and on that recorded for RCA. So I built up quite a nice collection. Well, then they transferred me to Indianapolis, and from there I went to, what was the next step? Oh, Pittsburgh, working for an oil company, Gulf Oil. They transferred me to Houston, and from Houston I came to Little Rock. And people who meet me for the first time say, where are you from? And I say, Texas. And that doesn't quite sit right with them. You don't sound like a Texan. But then I have to go through the same routine that I did with you. I came here because the former president of the ABC affiliate here, KATV, decided to start a marketing consultant firm. And I became the third member of a little company, and my job was to do marketing research studies, public opinion studies, and present them on television. So I got to know Steve very well, and he and I did a deal about, like once every other week. I'd go on for a 5-minute segment. And meanwhile, I had in my head that great love for the music of the big bands specifically, and of course jazz going along with it, hand in hand, so to speak. And it was in 1983 that I started my radio program. You might be interested in how that came about.
Yes.
There was a commercial station in North Little Rock. It was called the Music of Your Life station.
I remember.
It was actually a national idea with local affiliates. And the local affiliate for our area was in North Little Rock.
Okay.
One Friday afternoon, I remember it so well, I got a phone call toward the end of the day from a man who introduced himself as saying he was the producer of a program that was hosted by Skitch Henderson. And of course I knew that name. He was one of the prominent band leaders of the well into the 50s.
Yeah.
The program was called Music Makers. It was on for 1 hour every week. Locally, it was broadcast on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. And he said, the reason I'm calling you is I understand you have a rather large record collection. And he said, Skitch's guest for next week will be Helen Forrest. And she's going to be talking about that great recording that she did with the Benny Goodman Orchestra, The Man I Love. He said, by any chance, do you have a copy of it? We can't seem to find it. I said, well, just wait a minute. And I went back in these pre-computer days to my handwritten listing of every song that I had in my collection. I came back to the phone and I said, yes, I've got 3 copies. It's a 12-inch, 78 RPM record. He said, well, do us a favor. He said, pick out the best one of the 3, put it on a cassette, and here's our FedEx number. So I did as told. All right, the next Saturday morning, I'm in the kitchen. My wife is finishing drying the dishes, and I'm sitting in the chair listening to the radio. I'm listening to Music Makers. And Skitch Henderson said, and now, Helen, let's listen to that recording that you made with Benny Goodman. And the music started, and I reached over for a pad and a pen, and I started writing. And my wife Tish said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm writing a news release." "A news release? What about?" "About the fact that Local Boy's record is being played on national radio." Well, she looked at me as wives will, saying, "Who cares?" I said, "Well, I'm going to send it into the Gazette, and who knows, it may be a slow news day, maybe they need a little filler. I just thought it might be something that they would want to run." And she looked at me with that look, and "Go ahead." I said, "But before I do it, I better check with the station, make sure it's okay, because of course I'll mention the station." So the following Tuesday, I went over to the station and I showed this news release, what was it, maybe one paragraph, to the station manager. And he wasn't really interested in it for some reason. But he said, "Have you ever done radio?" I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Well, do you know how to mix?" I said, "Well, if I'm in a social gathering, I get to say that." He said, oh, never mind." He said, "We have a 24-hour engine here at the station. Would you be interested in doing a program?" Well, that sounded kind of fun to me. I said, "Yeah." He said, "We have something opening up on Sunday." And I said, "Yeah, I could do a 1-hour program." He said, "No, it's got to be 2 hours. We got to fill a 2-hour gap." I said, "I don't think I could do 2 hours," because I was already thinking, I'll have a theme. I will have a Dinah Shore day. And 2 hours of Dinah Shore, no, I don't think that would work. He said, "Well, it's got to be 2 hours." So I compromised. I said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll do 2 1-hour programs back to back." I think that was a compromise. Anyway, he bought it immediately. And that's what started what is now 2,045 broadcasts.
Wow, amazing. You have such a wonderful voice. Did you ever, in your curriculum as a younger person, have theater or radio training or anything like that?
No, I had nothing like that.
Yeah.
I remember when I was about 8 years old, I had a little girlfriend about 8 years old, and her father was a minister. And I was over at their house, and she said, "We're going to need a pair of scissors for that. There's probably a pair in my daddy's room." And I went in there, and I asked for a pair of scissors. And he said, "You've got quite a voice." I didn't know until then that it was anything different from anybody else's.
Yeah.
So, no, I'd never had any training.
Yeah. I wonder, maybe if listening to the radio a lot, because I grew up right at the end of the radio era. And Gunsmoke, Tarzan, things like that,
Yes.
I heard on the radio, even boxing. So I'm really attuned to that vocal thing. And I wonder if you obviously didn't have transistor radios when you were growing up, but did you probably spend a lot of time with your ear to the radio or listening or keying in
I
on
listened.
that?
I listened to Martin Block every night. My parents let me get away with it. I would go up into my bedroom with my homework, and I would do my homework while listening to Martin Block, and especially at the exciting time when he would play the new releases, the records that had just been arrived at WNEW, and he would play those. And I remember one in particular, it seems to me I've heard that song before by Harry James. I remember when he played that, and it was the first time on the air in the New York metro area, and I thought, that's a great one. And sure enough, it became a million seller. And it also was Helen Forrest, I believe, on the vocals. So
Yeah.
Helen is big in my life.
Yeah.
Oh, when I lived in Indiana, there was a program on Sunday nights, which included a contest, a mystery vocalist contest. And Charlie, I guess he was, would say, all right, the first person to identify the vocalist on this record will get a free LP from Charlie's record shop. I won the contest 10 times, to the point where he said, and the winner is my good friend David Miller. So I knew I had something going for me in that respect. A lot of knowledge that had been tucked away. It was hidden for so many years because I'm a social psychologist.
Right.
I did surveys.
Yeah.
I did focus groups. I did not do music. There really was a period from like 1960 to 1980. Well, during the Elvis Presley period.
Yeah.
I knew who he was, but I could tell you nothing about really the music of that era.
Yeah.
But then I came back to it in the 80s. And I like to say that I'm sort of caught in a web of the 30s to the late 1940s. That's my era.
Right.
And I love that music, and I like to teach it at Life Quest here in Little Rock.
Yeah.
I started out actually rather late. I think it was, I've done it for 20 years.
Yeah.
So, but I started out, and it was a nostalgia program.
Mm-hmm.
The people in my group were the same age as me. They lived through the big band era as teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
So I shared with them the memories of music. Mm-hmm. Well, now I'm still teaching at Life Quest, but it's not nostalgia anymore. It's music history.
Yeah.
I've had to change the focus. And I can't just say something about Charlie Christian joining the Benny Goodman Orchestra on electric guitar. I have to explain that Charlie Christian was a black man who was not permitted to be member of the regular band when they appeared. Rather, when Charlie played with the Benny Goodman Sextet, the rest of the band members left, and it was just Benny and Charlie and whoever else was in the group, which is social history.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's music. I'm still playing something that the Benny Goodman Sextet made in 1940, but I'm educating, I guess, rather than saying, hey, let's listen to the great stuff that we grew up on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard it often said that someone my age or younger will hear some music that they think is really good, and they're astonished to realize it came from an earlier generation. What they're hearing is a cover of something that was done 30, 40 years earlier. Do you encounter that kind of throwback, people suddenly discovering the roots of music?
I think the greatest delight I have is when somebody writes to me, sends me an email, and they'll say, I'm 32 years old, but I've discovered, thanks to you, I've discovered some really great music.
Yeah.
And that feels much better actually than the guy who says, I'm 89 years old and I remember when we had V-discs at our Army base.
Yeah,
I mean, that's great too,
yeah,
but that's nostalgia
yeah,
as opposed to someone who is being introduced to and appreciating
yeah.
something that was popular long before he was born, or even maybe his parents were born. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's fun.
yeah, that's true. Every so often I have a client or a friend who is from another country, and particularly like Europe, Armenia, places like that, and they'll refer to how old their culture is, how far back it goes, and the rich texture of everything. And in the States, we don't have that. But we're building some layers, and it does seem like if we can get some awareness of what's there, that we will get to that point and realizing that there's so much there in our country, so much that binds us together, so much we have in common. Do you get some of that from people then too?
Well, I know I'm very conscious of it. People ask me, will the big bands ever come back? That's the way they put it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, well, actually, they've never gone away.
Yeah.
But I said, I predict, and I think my prediction is going to turn out. I predict that the great music of the mid-20th century will, at some point in the future, be offered in the same manner as, well, like I'm going to go to the Arkansas Symphony for Beethoven's Seventh. I'm not saying that Jumping at the Woodside by Count Basie is equivalent to Beethoven's Seventh. What I am saying is that I think there's a lasting value of that music that is going to be appreciated, more than appreciated, is going to be swept up by future generations. Not everyone, but it's the same way with symphony music.
Yeah.
Not everyone goes to the symphony,
No.
but there are enough who are interested in it that I think we have an equivalent there. I look forward to. No, I don't. I don't look forward to it, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah. So you were part of a commercial enterprise. You are a psychologist with advanced degrees. You are a part of the business world. You're tuned in to what people like. You're tuned in to what people think. You've been part of the corporate establishment. And then at some point, maybe there's a fork in the road. I know Yogi Berra said when you see the fork in the road to take it. And maybe you did take that fork, but you took a direction at some point, I think, into the era of music, where you became well known. More for that probably than for all of the research you did over the years. Do you feel like your life diverged into a separate career path?
Yeah. I've written my memoirs. They're in 26 volumes. They're in the other room there. And I start out by saying that I have had 21 life-changing decisions. And one of them is probably number 18, is, yeah, I'll do that radio program. I think that was the turning point for me. Until then, yeah, I taught a course in Indianapolis to old folks like me, adult education. And I occasionally did a gig at a party where someone was, 50th wedding anniversary. I'd come along with some records and talk a little bit. But when I went on radio, that was a turning point, because that opened up my eyes to all of the things that I could do to build on my love of the music.
Yeah.
And that led to going to the Glenn Miller Birthplace Society meetings for 4 different times, interviewing that guy up there. That's Paul Tanner, who played trombone with the original Glenn Miller Orchestra. He's the one on the right, the kid on the left is me.
Yeah.
So I met Frankie Lane. I went on ocean cruises with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, and up and down the Mississippi on the boat.
I read that.
With bands like Russ Morgan's son Jack, and then he and his wife and his band, and I and my wife had about 7 days together on board the Radisson Seven Seas as it was sailing from Spain to Florida. So, I mean, this would not have happened had I not had that particular decision.
Yeah.
And the decision was strictly a yes-no.
Yeah.
You want to do radio? No. But I said yes.
Yeah. That's so interesting because you're talking about timeless music, or that's what you're known for, and yet you have made innovations throughout your life and you've been open to that. This sounds a little far-fetched, but it reminds me of Miles Davis, who said the reason for his success is that he has a bad memory. He doesn't care that he won the Grammy last year. He doesn't care that he had a gold record. He's thinking of something else, and he changed the course of his music 5 or 6 times because he was constantly wanting to embrace change. Now I'm hearing this where you're embracing opportunities and your mind is open. It's far-fetched as it is, there's a parallel path going on there.
Well, I'm going to use this now.
Okay.
I'm going to say, oh yeah, Miles and I, well, sounds good.
Yeah.
It does. Let me tell you a little story. I played clarinet badly as a kid, and the reason was that Benny Goodman was my idol.
Okay.
And right over on that wall, the camera can't see it, is the actual program of Benny Goodman's 1938 Carnegie Hall concert. And I was 10 years old at the time. I just thought Benny Goodman was the greatest, but I never met him until one day in 1977, yes. My daughter was a freshman at Smith College in Northampton, Mass. And she called me and she said, I know you're coming up. You know, you have to check on your daughter when she's a freshman, make sure she's doing all right. I know you're coming up such and such a weekend in October. She said, I notice that Benny Goodman is going to be appearing at Amherst, which is about 10 miles away. She said, would you perhaps be interested? Would I be interested? Yes. So she got on the shuttle bus between Smith and Amherst. They shared some courses. And then she called back. She said, I'm sorry, but it's a sellout. Well, I was going to go there anyway. So Saturday night, the kids on the Smith campus had a dance. And I knew that wasn't for me, but I thought, I think I got a rental car. I think I'll go over to Amherst, see what's happening over there. Got to the box office. Sorry, sir, it's a sellout. I'll wait around because maybe at intermission, maybe somebody will leave. And then she said, suit yourself. So intermission came, people came out to have a smoke. And after they went back in, I went again to her. She said, I'm sorry, sir, but there are no seats available. I said, but I came all the way from Texas to see Benny Goodman. She said, well, there is a shelf of sorts at the very back of the theater. It's where they have the spotlights. And it's just cement. but if you want to, you can sit up there. Yes, I'll do it. And then she's made me pay for a regular seat. But I got up there and I discovered that the Benny Goodman group, it was a, what's a seven? Septet. It was a septet. They had not yet performed. There was some sort of an opening act until an intermission. So I was able to see the whole darn show, and I was in heaven. See, I used to live in the same, I never mentioned Connecticut, I used to live in the same town as Benny Goodman, and I would go past his house on the way to visit my brother, and I always slowed down as I went past his house because I heard he was an inveterate gardener, and I thought maybe I could just get a glimpse of him out, and never did. So I saw the concert, and this was great, and I thought, you know, I noticed in the lobby they had a placard announcing the concert. That would be a nice souvenir to take. So I found someone who worked for the theater, and he said, oh yeah, we got a bunch, wait a minute, he said, they're all gone, I guess somebody took them all. I suppose the only one we have is the one down in our office. And then he said, yeah, but we don't need that anymore because the concert's over. Follow me. So I now have a piece of artwork to take home. And then I thought, you know, wouldn't it be great to have it autographed? And sure enough, if you look carefully on the upper right-hand corner, you will see Benny Goodman up there. I walked in, Benny had his overcoat on. This was in October, and it was cold in Massachusetts. He had his clarinet case under his arm. He was about to walk out and get on whatever transportation was waiting for him outside. And I said, would you please autograph this for me? And I said, oh, and by the way, I said, I do a lecture about your music in Texas. And he said, very good. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm getting praise from my idol, until I realized he didn't, you know, his reputation very much into himself.
Yeah.
He was looking at that particular poster, and he was looking at the artwork of himself playing the clarinet and saying, very good. Oh, well, that's all right. I've got it.
Interesting, yeah. I had planned to ask if you had written your memoirs, but you mentioned that you had done that.
Yes.
But I'm guessing there's still a work in process, right?
Well, the last one, volume 26, I indicated that it's the last one because I didn't think much would happen after, well, I wrote it right after my wife died, which was the 4th anniversary is coming up next week. Volume 25 was a tribute to her. I just laid it all out. Volume 26 was, I called it Wrapping It Up, which is anyone who knows the Benny Goodman band book knows that that's one of the numbers that he played. But I did say in the introduction, this is the last volume, but don't, you know, don't hold me to it. Who knows what's going to happen?
Well, you know, I looked at all this equipment here, and it's up to date. It involves a lot of techie things. Obviously, you're into keeping up and keeping abreast of things, or maybe even ahead of the curve. So I think that's an indicator there that you're staying with it.
Having grandchildren helps a lot.
Oh, it does. Yeah. I would ask you for your favorite memories, but it would be 8 o'clock in the morning. We'd still be talking. But if you could boil down maybe to 2 or 3 of your fondest memories, whether it's people you've met or fans of the program or just special moments, if you were running highlight reel of your life so far and had to boil it down to 2 or 3 or 4 of the most stellar things, what would that be?
I got a big kick out of interviewing Frankie Lane.
Mm-hmm.
I was there on a Princeton mini reunion, and I arranged to meet with him. I talked with his personal manager, and she said, yes, you can come 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and it can't go any later than 3 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So, he had a home high up on the hill looking down in the harbor. It was just a beautiful setting. And he came and was most cordial. We had just a wonderful chat. And came 3 o'clock, his manager came in and she said, I don't remember whether she called her Frankie or called him Frankie or Mr. Lane, but it's 3 o'clock. And so he bade me goodbye, gave me an autographed CD of his latest CD. I said, gee, I've never seen this one before. When did you record it? He said, 84. And I said, oh, 1984? He said, no, when I was 84. and I played the cuts on it. He still sounded good. But then I discovered the reason that I was kicked out at 3 o'clock was that's when he takes his nap.
That's funny.
So that was a great one.
Yeah.
I think getting to know Larry O'Brien, the leader of the Glenn Miller Orchestra, was a big, oh, I've got another one. I talked about Paul Tanner. When Paul turned 90, some people who had traveled with him on a big band cruise decided to hold a party for him at a club near where he lived, which was, I think it's called Riverside, California. And I got an invitation to attend it. So, yeah, sure, I really like Paul. He's a wonderful guy. So I arrived the night before, which meant that I could go over to the Lawrence Welk Museum. But I arrived at the party, and there was before you went inside the restaurant where the party was being held, there was a table set up, table and chair, and someone had a list. And I came along, and are you with the Paul Tanner party? I said, yes. I'm David Miller. And she looked at me, signed me in. And I thought, this is kind of odd. And I went in and I saw some people that I hadn't met before. And I introduced myself and they looked at me strangely. And then we discovered that it seems that there was a cameraman on the ship who got buddy-buddy with these people, Paul Tanner's group, and his name was David Miller. And they decided that they were having a reunion and they ought to have David Miller there. So they asked Paul, we don't know how to get in touch with him. And Paul said, oh, I have his contact information. That's how I got invited to the party. And they were kind of embarrassed about the whole thing because they hadn't treated me very well when I arrived. But then they decided that they had formed an informal fan club, and they decided that they made me the official secretary of the fan club, which, as far as I know, never got very far.
Yeah.
Next day, I went over to his house, Paul Tanner, and he said, "Hey, come on, I want to show you my car." He had a vanity plate which was PE 65000, Pennsylvania 65000.
Oh.
But the Glenn Miller days in Clarinda, Iowa were just marvelous. Bands came from Japan, Austria, Germany, Holland, Switzerland, England. They came to this little community in southwest Iowa for a weekend, actually a long weekend. I guess it started Wednesday night through Sunday noon.
Yeah.
And there was just non-stop music.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul Tanner was at that. In fact, he gave reminiscences of what it was like being a member of the Glenn Miller Orchestra.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Well, we're certainly appreciative for all of the enlightenment and enjoyment you've given us over the years, the knowledge, the fun, and the awareness of our American culture, the layers of that. I remember when I first became interested in jazz, I was in my 40s, and I wasn't sure where to start, and it was overwhelming, and I would read things in magazines about people saying it's overwhelming, and I took some zigs and zags and kind of went with what I liked. But for someone who wants to experience this music, it can be overwhelming just knowing where to start. What do you recommend for someone? Anything or just any kind of advice, or someone has an interest but they don't know where to start?
Well, there certainly are many sources. Over in that bookcase is about 1/6 of the volumes that I have on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
And as you've noticed, we're talking about jazz here, but I also talk more about big bands.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think a good place to start, just to get introduced to the topic, is a book called The Big Bands by George Simon. I have an extra copy, I think, over there.
Mm-hmm.
Just sitting down and listening. I know that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to something, and then, thanks to the computer, I learn more about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm on this computer behind me every day, and I'm doing searches I'm about to do a series of programs, I don't know how many it'll be, on the music of Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you talk about Richard Rodgers, you bring into focus Broadway shows and Hollywood movies. And I always want to get my facts straight, so I will go on here to the databases and discover who did the same person who played the role on Broadway also play it in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And that was not true of My Fair Lady, for example. I saw My Fair Lady in New York with Julie Andrews, and then they put it in Hollywood, and it was Audrey Hepburn, wasn't it?
Yeah.
She can't sing.
That's funny.
But I mean, that's the kind of thing.
That was it. Yeah.
So I haven't really answered your question. I think
That's
everybody has to find the route for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have a starting place and get intrigued with it, they find that, there's all kinds of rabbit holes you can go down. And increase your knowledge and increase your appreciation of the genre.
Yeah. So you're probably on Facebook, Instagram, things like that?
I don't.
You don't?
I am on Facebook, but I never contribute to it.
Really?
No,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just don't do that.
Okay. Well, this has been wonderful. To see this, it's kind of like I envisioned it actually when I've heard your program. It looks like I thought it would look. But it's just been such a pleasure to visit with you and hear these personal stories. They're a treasure. And you're certainly a living treasure of Arkansas. And
Thank you for
it's
that.
our great pleasure to give you this induction into the Hall of Fame. And we look forward to learning more. And again, getting back to Miles Davis at the end of his autobiography, he's talking about getting up every day, exercising, boxing, staying healthy, doing this, doing that, just doing it, getting up and being involved and vital. And it's obvious that's what you're doing here, and it shows, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you
David.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.